Welcome to Bench Stories, an hour program, webinar. I am Ben Schatz. I'm an appellate lawyer at Manat, Phelps, and Phillips. And as you know, these conversations cover a justice's career, memorable cases, current work, things like that. Today's program is the first installment of a new interview series by BHBA's litigation section, featuring our dedicated bench officers, their achievements, impact on our profession and our practice. The litigation section is chaired by Rudy Lair and Rachel Kogan. And if you have any ideas for future bench stories or for other further programming, or you just want to get more involved, please reach out to those section officers via the BHBA website. Please remember to sign up for the webinar program on Monday, March 6th, which is going to be a conversation with LASC's new presiding judge, Samantha Jessner, regarding the state of the court and Judge Jessner's plans for her term. BHBA President Malcolm McNeil will be interviewing her, and there'll be introductions by the litigation section vice chair, Rachel Kogan. For today's program, we will be allowing questions. So if you have questions, just go ahead and post them in the Q&A, and I'll keep my eye on that. So without any further ado, I want to get right to our very special guest, which is a retired Justice Ming Chin, a man who needs no introduction. You pull up his profile, and you just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. I think he's received every possible award, but he's such a gentleman that he continues to do these programs and be a very active participant in the bar. So let's get to know Justice Chin a little bit more, and let's talk a little bit at the beginning about his pre-lawyer life. We know that he was born to Chinese immigrants on a potato farm in Oregon, and that he has 7 older siblings. He moved to San Jose and attended USF for college and law school. And Justice Chin, will you share some things about your life before becoming a lawyer? We've heard some of the stories about you and the judge in Oregon, and we'd love to hear a little bit about that, and also about your siblings.
Well, thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be with you today. If we want to go back that far, I was born and raised on a potato farm in Oregon. As you said, I'm the youngest of 8 children. We lost 2 of them early on, so I really only grew up with 6 of them. But one was killed in an automobile accident, and my brother Mary was killed in an automobile accident, and Jack was killed when the family home was destroyed by fire. So there were 6 of us, and at one time my father had 3 in college and 3 in a private Catholic grammar school, boarding school in Klamath Falls. By the time I got to junior high school, the Sisters of St. Francis had quite enough of the Chin family, so they stopped boarding. The judge in town was a friend of my father's, Judge David Vandenberg, and Judge Vandenberg called my father and said, "Why don't you have Ming come and live with us for the last 2 years of junior high school?" I did that, and what a remarkable experience it was. The judge took me down to the court. I was observing jury trials. He handed me the gun in a murder case. He gave me Blackstone to read when I was 12. It's a wonder I became a lawyer, but it was a remarkable experience, and it certainly tweaked my interest in becoming a lawyer.
And what is it that your other siblings went on to do? Did any of them go into the law, or only you?
I'm the only lawyer. The brother right next to me became an orthodontist. My sister became a dental hygienist. The 2 others went to Oregon State, and one majored in engineering. He eventually came back to the farm, and he built most of the equipment that we used on the farm, including the first automatic potato picker in the Klamath Basin. and my sister graduated from Oregon State in economics and worked for the state of California, lives in Sacramento currently. My brother Joe attended UC Davis, but decided that dad needed help on the farm and returned home and helped my father on the farm.
So you went to law school in San Francisco, and then you went into the Army when you were a captain in the Army, and then you were in the reserves afterwards. And I know you were at Fort Lewis in Washington, which is now the Joint Base Lewis McChord, and you were in Fort Carson in Colorado, and then you were in Vietnam at the U.S. Army headquarters. And we know that you got a Bronze Star, so you had to have been in a combat zone. Would you tell us a little bit about your experiences in the Army and in Vietnam?
Well, I'll give you a thumbnail sketch of it because it covered a period of a couple years active duty and a couple years in the reserves. But I'll tell you just a bit about the active duty. I was actually moved from Fort Carson, Colorado to Quang Tri, Vietnam as a unit with the 5th Division.
The Red Devils.
The Red Diamonds.
The Red Diamonds, yes.
Some also known as Devils. But the remarkable part of it was that the Army moved 5,000 men and 2,000 vehicles from Fort Carson, Colorado to Quang Tri, Vietnam, which is 7 miles below the DMZ. And we were operational within 1 week. It was an incredible feat. And I participated in that at the granular level. And I came to understand why the Army does things over and over and over again, because when push comes to shove and you have to move 5,000 men and 2,000 vehicles and be operational within a week, you know that things have to run on time and things have to run as planned. So I gained a great admiration for the military and for the way the military has to operate under those circumstances. It was remarkable, and I met some of the most incredible people. My boss in Vietnam taught at the Air Force at West Point, and just terrific people to work with under very difficult circumstances.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That level of organization and movement sounds like a judge carrying a busy docket. So I think there were some good lessons for you there, and maybe just as much hostility. So let's talk about your legal career then. So after the Army, you come back and you serve 3 years as a deputy district attorney in Alameda, and then you get 15 years of civil practice. Where you were the president of the Alameda County Bar Association in '87. And then you get to the bench, Alameda County Superior Court for a couple of years, and then the Court of Appeal, First District, for 6 years, with a year as a PJ of Division III. And then you get to the California Supreme Court, and you're there for almost 25 years, from '96 to 2020. You authored over 350 majority opinions, and now you're at ADR Services. That's a thumbnail, but there's a lifetime of wisdom and experiences built into that. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Who influenced you over that time? Who were your mentors to get you to each of those steps? Anything you want to say about your bar activities and involvement, since this is a bar program? Thoughts on practicing law as opposed to judging? And I'll just stop there and let you take over.
This could take a while, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. I mean, if you talk about who influenced me and what mentors did I have, I mean, it is a long list of very generous people. But I'll start with the first one because I clerked in the Alameda County DA's office while I was in law school. But I knew that I had an Army commitment. And when I finished law school, the Army said, it's time. So I went to Vietnam, and I got a letter from the DA, who was Frank Coakley in Alameda County, saying that when I finished my tour of duty in Vietnam, I had a job in the Alameda County District Attorney's office. What a gift that was, because as you can well imagine, it's difficult to find a job and interview when you're in a foxhole. So having a job when I got out of the Army was a real blessing. The only problem was by the time I got out of the Army, Frank Coakley retired. Lowell Jensen, fortunately, was appointed to replace him. I called Lowell and he said, come on in. So I went in for an interview with Lowell. I told him about Frank's offer, and he said, of course, we'll honor the offer. So Lowell became a mentor. I already knew him while I was clerking there, but he became a close mentor of my entire legal career. Fast forward some 30 years, maybe more. Tino Cuellar is appointed to the court. He immediately invites me to his home. He's married to Lucy, as you know, and Tino and Lucy invite Lowell. Why? Because when Lowell was on the federal court and Lucy was appointed to that court, their chambers were right next door to each other. So it is amazing how life continues to roll and intersect. So I invite Lucy to our home for a barbecue. They bring their children, and we're out on our back deck, and we're talking and having a great time. And suddenly Lucy says, Ming, stop that. I was shocked. She was looking right at me. As it turns out, she was talking to her son, whose Korean nickname is Ming. And apparently Ming too was doing something he shouldn't be doing. So that just tied it all together for me. But Lowell was one of the first mentors I had. The other mentor that I have to talk about is Fred Cummings of Aiken, Kramer and Cummings. Fred was one of the best friends I'll ever have. He was a terrific lawyer and mentor in the law firm. You remember the retention election that I had to go through? My campaign consultant was Ken Kachigian from the Reagan administration. And when it was time came to pick a treasurer for the campaign, Ken looked me right in the eye and said, Ming, pick the person in this world who is your best friend and who you can trust explicitly. I thought about it for a whole second and said, it has to be Fred Cummings. I called Fred up, asked him to do it. He didn't hesitate a second in accepting that responsibility, even though it knew it would take him away from his law practice. And he was terrific at not only that job, but mentoring me through all of my positions. He spoke at my confirmation hearing for the Court of Appeal. He spoke at my confirmation hearing for the presiding justice slot. He spoke at my confirmation for the Supreme Court. So at least those two people. I'll mention a third one. I don't want to take up too much time, but the third one was Bernie Whitkin. Bernie was a dear friend. As you know, he passed away right before I was appointed to the court. But interestingly enough, before he died, he called me and we had a long conversation. And he said, Ming, I would like your permission to call the governor to urge your appointment to the court. And I said, Bernie, you don't need my permission, but thank you for that. Actually, Alba Whitkin spoke at my confirmation hearing for the Supreme Court, but I could not let this question pass without talking about Bernie Whitkin and his effect on my life and career. Now we've just gotten to mentors. You wanted me to talk about the Bar Association presidency. I was the first Asian president for the Alameda County Bar Association in its then over 100-year history. Marv Baxter was the appointment secretary for Governor Digmajan. Marv and I have very different recollections about this topic. Marv thinks that I was playing hard to get. Marv casually mentioned to me at one gathering that I saw him at, would you be interested in becoming a judge? And I said something like, well, I've committed to be president of the Bar Association, and I would like to carry out that commitment. Marv thought I was playing games with him. I wasn't. I just said, as a matter of fact, I made a commitment. I want to keep it. And that Bar Association commitment was important to me because there had never been an Asian president, and I wanted to show everyone that we could do it and do it well. So I was committed to that. But the work in the Bar Association was really important for me because you got to work with lawyers not in an adversarial atmosphere like you do in practice. And you got to work with lawyers in an effort to better the profession. So I commend all the members of the Beverly Hills Bar Association for their commitment in continuing the improvement of our beloved profession. So I really think that Bar Association work is important. It was important to me. It was important to my family. So I'm not sure what else you want me to talk about, Ben, in this question, but I think that gives you a general background of my mentors and the importance of work in the Bar Association.
Oh, that was wonderful. You know, I threw a compound question at you. So let's
and I gave you a compound answer.
Let's hear your thoughts on practicing law, which you did for quite a while, versus judging. And what's more fun, you know, winning a big case, you won at least 2 cases with judgments over $1 million, or writing an opinion.
Fun? Oh, I'd have to go with the winning. It's always more fun to win. Intellectually challenging, certainly the opinions, certainly the decisions, certainly seeing how those decisions are received by the profession and academia. That was intellectually fun, but the adrenaline you get from getting $1 million judgment, I can't think of anything more rewarding. And to get 2 of them in a career of practice was unheard of. So I was blessed. But I also had terrific people to work with. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of people putting in a lot of effort to get great results. One result was for the little guy. It was a wrongful termination case. And the other one was for a large construction firm. Both of them were unique in the sense that winning for the little guy is really exciting. But winning for the big guy was also exciting because in the arbitration, my client was the respondent. The claimant filed for 1.2 million. Claimant got nothing. My client got 1.2 million. That was a win. And I said, maybe it's time for me to become a judge because it's not going to get any better than that.
So in terms of your judicial service, what can you share with us about the differences between being a trial court judge, a court of appeal justice, and then a Supreme Court justice? And in particular, did you feel liberated when you got to the Supreme Court that you were beyond the shackles of stare decisis?
Well, as you know, Ben, my son is a trial judge on the same court that I sat on. So I'm going to put in a plug for trial judges. They're on the front line. They decide cases, hard cases, every day by themselves. It is an incredibly difficult position to put judges out there on the front line. So I have immense respect for our trial judges and our trial bench. Moving from the trial court to the Court of Appeal was a little bit like going back into private practice, because I was now consulting with other lawyers and judges all the time. I couldn't make a decision by myself, not like the trial court where everything is decided by yourself and you can't talk to anybody. There is no one really to talk to. I mean, you can go off the bench and phone your colleague or go down the hall and talk to a colleague, but it's unusual. You're out there on the bench making decisions by yourself every day. So being on the Court of Appeal was like being on a legal team in a law firm. Moving to the Supreme Court was much the same, only now you had to get 3 other signatures and talk to 6 other chambers. And it was even a larger law firm that you had to deal with. So the differences were immense. Of course, the caliber of cases got more and more refined the farther up the ladder you went, and there were no easy cases on the Supreme Court. There were a few easy cases on the Court of Appeal, but there were also some very difficult cases. I remember the Shell Oil case on the Court of Appeal took as much time as any case that I worked on the Supreme Court, and didn't have near the amount of background and support to work on that case. You have much more support and expertise on the Supreme Court, so that was a benefit. On the issue of whether or not I felt relieved from stare decisis, Ben, you and I just did a program on this. It received some good reviews, and I thought you did a terrific job in moderating that program on a really unusual subject, that is how do you avoid stare decisis, and how do you get the court not to grant review. I really enjoyed doing that program with you, and as I said before this program, it was so counterintuitive that it really got me thinking about the subject matter. But on the issue of whether or not I felt liberated, I think that I really obtained a greater appreciation for stare decisis. The law has to be consistent, and if people can't predict what rights they're going to have under the law, we're going to have chaos. We can only have predictability if we have some semblance of attention to what has gone on in the past. Now, you sent me an article recently about a judge who wrote an article saying that stare decisis is a herd mentality. I respectfully disagree. Again, I don't think that following what learned people have done in the past is a herd mentality. I think that it establishes stability in the law, and we ought to pay attention to it. I think it was Felix Frankfurter who said that learning from I think he said learned men. I would say learned individuals from the past is a little bit like getting an inheritance. Learning from their wisdom helps us decide the current problem. And if we look at a current problem and some learned individual in the past has already analyzed it and come to a reasonable conclusion, my question is, why wouldn't you want to follow it? So I've never felt shackled by stare decisis. I welcome it. And anytime someone with wisdom has an analysis that I can use in a current case, I will look at that analysis, determine whether or not it fits under the facts that I have, and follow it if appropriate. But I don't consider them shackles. I don't consider following stare decisis, following the herd. If the herd is not deciding cases rationally and logically, then you should question the herd. But if it's learned and reasonable, why not pay attention to it?
So drawing upon the wisdom and experience that you had as a successful trial lawyer and then as a judge at all levels in the court system, what are the most important lessons for practicing lawyers? We always have to ask this question, right?
Well, let's see. I think, first of all, when you get in front of a judge, remember, these people are very busy. I mean, I used to talk about having 300 cases on a Wednesday to determine whether or not to grant review. That's just a small sample of what judges have on their desk all day, every day. I remember Alan Broussard talking to me when he was on the court. He said, Ming, if I get one more piece of paper in my chambers, I'm going to scream. Because he just felt overwhelmed by the number of requests and paper. And so my suggestion to any attorney, whenever you're in front of a judge, regardless of the trial court, the Court of Appeal, or the Supreme Court, be succinct, be brief, be direct, tell them exactly why you're there, what you want, and why they should give it to you. And think about all that judge has on their particular calendar. If you want to get their attention, that's the way to do it. Be direct and tell them exactly what you want. The other thing that I want young lawyers to know, you build your reputation one case at a time, one day at a time. And every day you either, and with every case, you either enhance or detract from that reputation. So pay attention to what's right in front of you, do the right thing, do your very best on that matter, and then move on. And don't look 10 years down the road saying, I want to be on the Court of Appeal in 10 years, so I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. No, pay attention to what's right in front of you. Do the best job you can on that matter, and you will be held in good stead, because if you do it on that matter and the next one and the next day and the next week, everything in your career will take care of itself. Be the best attorney you can possibly be on every matter that you have in front of you, and things will take care of itself.
So as a judge and a justice, you were forced to be a generalist. You had to do all kinds of law, civil, criminal, family, you name it. And yet over the years, you developed some particular areas of expertise. And I see on the shelf right behind you, there's some rudder guides. And it's amazing that you're not just known for one rudder guide, the pink employment book, but you've done two. You've got one on forensic DNA and who knows what else. So what areas would you consider to be your sweet spots and your areas of expertise, and how did that come about?
Well, Ben, certainly the employment law treatise, the 3 volumes, the pink volumes behind me. Originally worked on it with David Cathcart from Gibson Dunn, and it took David and I 6 years to put that together. But if Bill Rudder asked me to do that way back then, if Bill Rudder asked me to do that now, and he told me, and by the way, you have to update it every year, I would have said, thank you, but no thank you, Bill. But as it has turned out, it has been a real blessing, because it has forced me to keep up in a whole variety of areas of the law that I may or may not have kept up with. So I thank Bill for that, sort of. Bill also asked me to do the DNA practice guide. And I have drafted the last chapter in that book every year. And it is really a survey on science and the law. So I have enjoyed both areas of the law. I have enjoyed keeping up with both areas of the law. But the science part of it has been probably the most exciting. The Rudder group asked me to do a program on science a couple of years ago. I said yes. They asked me what the subject matter would be, and I said it has to be CRISPR. And they said, who would you get to do it? And I said, well, I would start with Dr. Jennifer Doudna. Dr. Doudna is a scientist from UC Berkeley that really pioneered the use of CRISPR. This is a gene therapy. It actually occurs naturally in our systems. When a virus enters, the CRISPR makes a copy of it so that when the virus re-enters, it can attack it. Well, Dr. Doudna has been able to program CRISPR to go in and remove various mistakes in the DNA.
And then
For
there's that amazing book about her called Codebreaker, which
yes,
I assume that you've read that one.
I have read it, and I've read her book, her biography. And by the way, in the middle of doing this, preparing for this program, Dr. Doudna wins the Nobel Prize in chemistry for her work on CRISPR. And she gave me the head of her CRISPR lab to do the program for Rudder. And Rudder told me at the end of that program, he said, Ming, it was Juan said, Ming, that was one of the best continuing education programs we have ever done. It was a privilege to do it. I'll just give you one example. Sickle cell is caused by one mistake in the genetic alphabet. CRISPR was used to go in, extract that one letter in the 2 billion base pairs that we have, and insert the proper letter. A year later, the woman is cured of sickle cell. I mean, can you imagine the possibilities for the whole list of other ailments that CRISPR can be used to remedy? So from the sense of possibilities and the sense of excitement about what's to come, keeping up on areas that are not strictly legal, but exciting for humanity. I'm glad that I have employment law. I'm glad I have CRISPR to keep me busy in retirement, because they're both exciting fields.
Well, we'll get to some more science fiction near the end of the program. But since we were talking about Codebreaker and some other books, one of the questions from the audience is, what's your favorite book? Something maybe you've read in the last 5 years that has resonated with you and that you would recommend to this audience?
I really, well, Walter Isaacson's book is the one you mentioned on Jennifer Doudna. That is a terrific book, and I highly recommend it. Walter Isaacson also wrote a book on Leonardo da Vinci. I recommend it. It's insightful. It's incredible. He also wrote one on.
You're such a Renaissance man.
on Steve Jobs, and it's the first one that he wrote on a living person, because Steve called him and said, "I want you to do my biography," and Walter said, "Call me in 5 years," and he said, "I won't be here." So the other books that I really like are the author of Hamilton, and I can't remember.
Ron Chernow.
Ron Chernow. How could I forget that?
Yeah.
Anyway, Lin-Manuel Miranda read Hamilton. I picked it up at the airport. By the way, he's the playwright that wrote Hamilton. But he picked it up at the airport. He takes it to Mexico and he reads Hamilton on the beach. I don't believe that. Anyway, he was so enchanted with the book that he comes back and he calls Chernow and he says, "Can I meet with you?" And Chernow says, "Sure." So they meet, and he writes the first 2 stanzas of Hamilton, and he takes it to Chernow. He has summarized the first 50 pages of Hamilton in 2 stanzas. And Chernow says, "If you can do that, have at it." So as you know, Chernow or Miranda did it. He wrote Hamilton, and it was spectacular. But Chernow's books are incredible. You start with Hamilton and go to the Warburgs, the Jewish industrialists. He wrote John D. Rockefeller. He wrote Grant. I mean, all of those are terrific. I love history, and all of Chernow's books are terrific in that regard. So, long answer to a short question.
Well, you threw out the name Miranda. Miranda, of course, is known to lawyers as a famous case. What do you think is your most famous case, or your case most important to litigators? You know, I think Sargon might be on the list, but there may be some other case that you feel is your magnum opus in a sense.
Well, I'm not sure that I have any, but I would certainly put Sargon on the list because it deals with scientific evidence and the what judges should take into account in deciding whether or not to admit scientific evidence. I'll tell you just a short side story because I was going to teach at the FBI Academy. I was going to teach DNA at Quantico, Virginia. So I'm going to be in DC. So I write to Justices Kennedy, Scalia, and O'Connor on the U.S. Supreme Court and say, "I'm going to be in DC. You have a few minutes to talk to me." All of them said yes. So I go to visit Justice Kennedy, and he says, "Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals is going to be argued today. Would you like to sit in?" Of course. So he says, "I'll have my law clerk escort you down to the courtroom." I know I'm sitting in a very important chair because I can see the podium. I can see the lawyer's notes on the podium. And there's an engraved nameplate on the back of the chair that says Mrs. Kennedy. So I sit through oral argument. And one of the questions Justice Blackmun asks is, who was the author of Fry? Nobody knew. So I'm going to tell you now, because I came back and looked it up. It's a DC Circuit, just not a Supreme Court case. It's a DC Circuit case. The author's name is Hosea Van Orsdale. A leading light. Yeah, well, I understand why Daubert did not accept that as binding precedent. It's a 3-page opinion. It's not well thought out. But as you know, we had a case in California called People versus Kelly. And the Supreme Court, before I got on the court, said Kelly is enough, and we are sticking with it. Kelly was much more analytical than Fry, and it filled in the details. So in Sargon, I tried to fill in more of the details to add more flesh and bone to the analysis that trial judges ought to use. It's not simply counting noses, it's counting what's behind the nose and is it well thought out. So one of my good friends from law school is a widely known evidence professor from UC Davis by the name of Ed M. Winklereid. So Ed wrote to me and said, "You're beginning to sound an awful lot like Daubert." So
Well,
maybe I was at least on the right track. So, but
well, I'm not at all surprised that you've got a connection to Professor Winklereid. I've used him a number of times. I've reached out to him to get his expertise, and he's always been very receptive. And that's a good segue into what your current work is, because I've done the same with you. You know, you're now off the bench and at ADR Services, and when I have a tough Supreme Court issue or petition, you know, I reach out to you and hire you to help with that. And you've done that for me. And so let's talk about you know, what sort of work you're doing now and how you think lawyers are using you effectively or how they're failing to use you in ways that they should.
Well, Ben, I really appreciated working with you on your matter. When they asked me to do this program, you were the first person I thought of. So thank you for doing it. The question on the table is, what is the question you're asking?
Well, so what sort of work are you doing now? Since you're at ADR Services, you know, I was talking about the appellate consulting angle to that, but I assume you're probably also being hired to do arbitrations or mediations and all of that bread and butter.
I am doing a lot of consultations, even doing moot courts, which I enjoy, and I hope they're helpful to the lawyers that ask me to do them. I also am doing mediations, arbitrations, referee work. I've received interesting science cases from LA as a referee. So I am doing some things that I was not necessarily familiar with during all of my years on the court. It's astonishing how broad the reach is on the need for neutrals. So I'm enjoying the work. I did a 4-day arbitration last week remotely. It was very well done by the lawyers, and it was particularly helpful on the expert witnesses that were in various locations throughout the state and the country. It is particularly efficient to do that on Zoom. I encourage lawyers to do that. Even if you want to have some of it in person, we can arrange to have a hybrid. But it seems to me that the issue on expert witnesses doing their testimony remotely makes so much more sense. They should be in their labs, they should be in their offices, they should be doing what they do as experts and not sitting around waiting to testify for our arbitrations. So I encourage lawyers to think about that from a cost-saving standpoint. It makes so much more sense. I think even in trials, it makes so much more sense. And people say, well, but you lose that personal contact. Well, there is some of that, but I see a lot on the TV screen that I can't see in person because of the distance I am from the witness, or in a courtroom, you're not necessarily up close and personal. One of the problems the Supreme Court had right after we started oral argument was that those justices who were in the courtroom looked like ants on the screen because the lawyers could not see their expressions. I said, the solution to that is to put a computer in front of everyone, even those who are in the courtroom. So they did that, and that solved the problem. So I think that when you have a meeting and you have an arbitration and some people are live, have a computer in front of everyone in that arbitration so that everyone who participates can see the individuals up close and personal. I have really enjoyed, am really enjoying the neutral work. I think it's an important function. Every case that I settle or resolve is one that my former colleagues on the courts don't have to deal with. So I feel like I'm making a contribution. Now, I had some criticisms of this process while I was on the court, and I still think that some of the criticism is warranted, and that criticism is, if all of these cases are being, many of these cases are being decided outside the court system, how are we going to develop the law? If critical issues are not rising to the Supreme Court level, how is the law in California going to be developed? I still don't have an answer to that question. I think it's still a legitimate question and problem that will eventually have to be answered. I'm not really seeing gaps in the development of the law currently, but there may be some, and I think future judges and justices ought to pay attention to it. If you find wide gaps developing, you've got to somehow develop a system that will get those cases before our appellate courts so that we can have written decisions on those important issues. And I think attorneys like Ben, who are specialized in appellate work, ought to keep an eye on that. Because if you see areas that are not being developed, you ought to work on getting them to the appellate courts so that we can get some law on the books in those areas where it's needed.
Well, thank you for that insight. I'm glad you went there because I was going to go there too. I remember that Justice Mosk, the Court of Appeal justice in LA, would often make very similar comments along those lines. Let's. I promised a little bit of science fiction since we got into science and so forth. Let's talk about the future and science fiction and fantasy, starting with your comments a minute ago made it clear that you seem to like these remote programs and remote court hearings. And there is some tension in the appellate world right now about whether all oral arguments should be required to be back in person again, or whether there are some advantages to having remote oral arguments. And so I'm wondering where you come out on that.
I frankly liked the remote oral arguments. I still remember the attorney who was scheduled to be in San Francisco and arrived he was from LA and he arrived in Sacramento. I said, you know, if we had remote oral arguments, he could have stayed in LA and argued to us in San Francisco. but I realized that some people don't like the remote oral arguments. I am not one in that category, but I certainly appreciate that position. I just wonder why we're spending so much money flying people all over the place when they could be in their offices being more productive, And actually, some attorneys feel more comfortable in their offices arguing remotely. I found that we had less grandstanding when it was remote, and people were really talking to us and not at us. But I realized there are two sides to that story. I felt relieved when I didn't felt relieved that the pandemic came. I felt relieved that the pandemic made it mandatory that the California Supreme Court got to notify all attorneys that we can no longer accept paper. I mean, I've been pushing that for 10 years. It took a pandemic to do it. So I am glad that we were ready and that we were able to continue to operate remotely. The AI is continuing to develop. I think the problem will be when AI gets more intelligent than the attorneys and judges who are using it. I remember you invited me to the academy, and one of the attorneys was predicting how our opinions were going to come out. I don't think he was using AI, but that was scary. I mean, why do we need judges if we can predict how these opinions are going to come out?
Yeah, he's been crunching that data by hand. And you're right. You know, if you get that data into the right sort of big data computer, there's a lot of interesting artificial intelligence and prediction that can spit out of that.
I remember I asked him, Ben, whether or not he's been able to predict. Has he reviewed my opinions, and can he predict how my opinions are going to come out?
Yeah, and we're talking about Kurt Jenkins, and he has a wonderful blog that people can look at and see his analysis on a variety of different things. You know, the hot issue in AI right now is this whole Chat GPT development, where you can just say to a computer, you know, write me a brief, and it gives you something. Now it may not be very good, but it might be something. So, which raises the question in my mind: is there any briefing or even oral argument that you recall from your time on the bench that particularly stood out as really, really good, and what made it good?
I can't remember her last name, but her first name was Pam, and she's from LA.
Pam Dunn?
You named an award after her.
Yes, yeah. LA County Bar has an award, has the Pam Dunn Award. Okay.
Pam was a terrific advocate, and I remember one particular oral argument. I always tell attorneys, have a theme. I mean, it's just like trial. Have a theme that you can go back to over and over during a trial. Appellate attorneys ought to have the same one, and Pam's was, in this particular oral argument, these decisions ought to be made in the homeowner's boardroom, not in a courtroom. And then she went down the list of what kinds of decisions should be made. The color of the carpet, the color of the drapes. and every time she said one, I said, yes, we don't want that in the courtroom. But that's just an example of Pam's appellate work that I so appreciated. I think that when you have attorneys like Ben Schatz's name on the briefs, I was always relieved to see attorneys like Ben on the briefs, because I knew with certainty I was going to get something that would help me solve this problem. And I knew that in oral argument, I could ask tough questions and I would get help from attorneys like Ben to zero in on the answer to these difficult issues that we have in front of us. So I've always appreciated good lawyering. It's even more appreciated on the Supreme Court because the problems are tougher, meatier, and more difficult to solve. Courts need all the help they can get. We want your help. We're not there to harass you. We're not there to make your life miserable. We're there to get the best answers and solutions to the problem in front of us. So don't be concerned about tough questions. That you should welcome them. You should embrace them because you now know what the court is thinking, and you can help the court find a solution to the problem they have in front of them.
On the problem solving front, you've now voiced some support for remote arguments, and you talked about how electronic filing has been a good development that was long overdue. What else should we be thinking about? How would you change our court system, appellate or otherwise? Being using your science and even fantasy. What would make for a better court system? What rule or ideas would you like to see in the future?
Ben, I'll tell you, this doesn't deal with fantasy, it deals with reality. When I was appointed to the trial court, the first meeting I had with my staff, I said, I expect everyone who comes into my courtroom to be dealt with dignity and respect. I don't care what they look like. I don't care how they're dressed. Everyone is to be treated well. I know that my staff did that because I started getting comments from lawyers. Judge Chin, where did you get the staff from? No one in this building or any other courthouse treats us this way. I think that everyone that deals with our court system ought to be treated that way. And we would have a better court system, and the court system would run more smoothly. I know that because by the time the attorneys got to me, they were in a cooperative manner rather than a hostile. So that doesn't have anything to do with high-flying intelligence. It has to do with dealing with people with courtesy.
Well, based on what you just said, I have my own idea now, and that is that we need cloning. We need more Justice Chins to fill the judiciary. And in fact, even that isn't so high-flying fantasy, because there is, as you mentioned, another Judge Chin out there. And I wonder if you want to talk just a little bit, since we started with your siblings, we can turn to your children, because you have two children who are in the law profession, right?
Yes, yeah. I have a son and a daughter, and we have 5 grandchildren. Our daughter has 2 daughters. Our son has 3 sons. Our daughter is a senior attorney in the general counsel's office for the University of California. And surprise, surprise, she runs the labor and employment law section. So when I was writing that book, Jennifer came to me and said, "Dad, is your book finished?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I really need a copy of it." She was with a law firm in San Francisco at the time doing labor and employment law. And I said, "Well, it's not out yet." She says, "I really need a copy of it." I said, "I'll think about it." So the next day I gave her the only copy I had of the employment law, labor and practice guide. So there she is in her office at, what was the name of the law firm anyway? I've forgotten it. Thielen, Reed and Priest. So she has this 3-volume pink book sitting on her desk, and one of the partners came in and said, "Where in the world did you get that from?" He said, "I have my sources." So as you mentioned, Jason is an Alameda County Superior Court judge, and I got to swear him in 30 years after I was sworn in the same courtroom. What a thrill that was. It was the experience of a lifetime. People came up to me afterwards and said, "How did you keep your composure through that?" I said, "It was not easy." But before that, Jason was the head of the DNA unit in the Alameda County District Attorney's office. So I had to write 2 books, one on DNA and one on employment law. But when Bruce Darling was the vice president of UC, he's now the head of the national labs in DC. But Bruce Darling was in charge of the 3 labs in California, Los Alamos, Berkeley, and Livermore. And Bruce got to know Jason when he was down at UC San Diego. And we kept in touch when he came up to Berkeley with UC. So Bruce said, would you and Jason like to tour the DNA lab at Livermore? And I said, I've been there and done that. I've taught there. But if Jason wants to go, I'd be happy to go again. So I called Jason. He said, of course, I'd love to see it. So we go out, get a tour of the DNA lab. And at the end of the tour, they tell Jason number 1, they tell him that they are developing a black box where you can put the DNA sample in one side and the result comes out the other. There's no more weeks of waiting. They have done that, by the way. And they also said, if you ever have matter that you can't get tested elsewhere, call us, we'll do it. So Jason had an in. They also took us to the cold fusion project at Lawrence Livermore, and they just announced that they've done it. So they can fuel a city the size of San Francisco with 2 5-gallon water bottles. I mean, the thing is the size of a warehouse. And I said, well, how are you can't bring everything here. He said, no, we are developing it on wheels so that it can be moved to different locations. So there, it's so exciting to be involved in these cutting edge science developments as they are occurring. I called Jason when I heard about the cold fusion success at Lawrence Livermore, and I said, isn't it nice to be in the front door of history? So it's exciting not just to have 2 children in the law, but doing important work in the law. And it's exciting to have to watch their grandchildren grow up. By the way, we all live in the city of Alameda. So Carol and I are very fortunate, and we are truly blessed.
Well, on the topic of generating unlimited energy through miraculous sources, I think you've got to have one of those cold fusion things in you, Justice Chen, because you have done so much over the years. You have such a legacy. Your opinions, your treatises, and now your family and your children and grandchildren. There's probably going to be another Justice Chen in our future. So that would be wonderful. I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us. If you have any parting comments that you want to present, we can do that. But we have reached our hour. So the final word.
Ben, I want to thank you for doing this. You've been a wonderful friend over so many years. I think Jason even worked for you at the beginning of his career. So you've been involved as a part of my family for a long, long time. I thank the Beverly Hills Bar Association for letting us visit with you today. I hope that you found it interesting. I've certainly enjoyed my conversation with Ben. Let's do it again.
That sounds wonderful. And I should mention, part of your great library of opinions is the very first opinion in which my name appears, which is back when you were on the Court of Appeal, 32 Calap 4th 14. So that's a special citation in my career. But thank you so much, Justice Chin, for sharing an hour with us. And with that, we will turn it back over to BHBA to shut down the webinar.